In Ohio, Curtis stands in the rain, staring at the massive clouds above, perplexed because it feels like motor oil instead of water is falling. But it's just a dream and the weather is actually beautiful. Later, Curtis has breakfast with his wife Samantha and their deaf daughter Hannah before heading to his construction job. Samantha, a housewife, takes care of Hannah and sews items to sell at the local fair on Saturdays. That afternoon, Samantha is at home with friends who have brought their kids for a playdate. One friend notices Hannah holding a dangerous piece of wood with nails, so Samantha rushes outside to stop her since yelling doesn't help. Shortly after, heavy rain forces the construction workers to call it a day, and they go for drinks at a bar. At home, Samantha teaches Hannah the sign for storm as they watch the rain through the window. After the bar, Curtis drops off his co-worker and close friend Duart. They chat and Duart remarks on Curtis's seemingly wonderful life. Curtis confesses that things aren't always as perfect as they appear. Their conversation is interrupted by Duart's wife, who silently demands he come inside. Curtis then heads home, checks on Hannah, and hears from Samantha that their daughter still struggles to connect with other children. The next day, Curtis is cleaning up trash to prevent Hannah from picking up dangerous items. Suddenly, a heavy storm rolls in and a lightning bolt strikes the ground, causing Curtis's dog, Red, to bark wildly. As Curtis reaches for Hannah, the dog breaks free and viciously bites his arm. However, Curtis wakes up in his room realizing it was another nightmare. At breakfast, Curtis can't shake how real the dream felt. Seeing Hannah playing with Red makes him anxious, so he moves her away from the dog. When Samantha asks what's wrong, Curtis snaps and leaves without eating. At work, Curtis remains distracted, constantly staring at his arm, feeling phantom pain. His boss, Jim, frustrated by rain delays, demands they catch up. Curtis asks Duart to help gather extra supplies. Taking a break, Curtis notices a swarm of black birds flying oddly in the sky. He asks Duart if he finds it strange, but Duart sees nothing unusual. Due to extra hours making up for lost time, Curtis arrives late to Hannah's parent-teacher conference, covered in mud. They learn more essential sign language, which Curtis needs to practice more since he doesn't spend as much time with Hannah as Samantha does. Later, during another rainstorm, Curtis rushes to get in the car with Hannah. The rain obscures his vision, leading to a crash. Curtis's head is bleeding, but Hannah is unharmed. Suddenly, men appear, breaking the car windows. One man holds Curtis down while the other kidnaps Hannah. Suddenly, Curtis wakes up screaming, realizing it was another dream. Feeling unwell, he goes downstairs where Samantha notices his condition. He assures her it's just a cold and encourages her to go to the fair with Hannah. While Samantha is busy selling her goods and negotiating prices, Curtis uses the extra supplies from work to build a fence around the doghouse, locking Red inside and apologizing to the dog. Curtis should be cleaning up the trash, but he is distracted by a door leading to a storm shelter. He finds the key in an old jar, opens the door, and goes down to contemplate a new idea. Later in the evening, Samantha adds the money she made at the fair to their vacation savings. She asks Curtis why Red is now kept outside, but he gives a vague answer. When she tries again, Curtis ignores her to listen to the news about a gas leak that affected a small family, feeding his paranoia. The next day, Curtis finds Hannah looking at the storm through the window. As he approaches, he is startled to see a man standing outside watching them. Curtis quickly grabs Hannah and hides as the man tries to open the door. Suddenly, the building begins to shake and objects in the living room start to levitate. Curtis struggles to breathe and everything falls, and he wakes up from another nightmare, horrified to find he has wet the bed. When Samantha enters, he quickly covers the wet sheets with blankets. Curtis asks for the doctor's number, and when Samantha tries to check on him, he snaps at her to keep her from seeing the wet sheets. He immediately apologizes for his outburst, blaming it on feeling unwell, but still insists she goes to church while he takes care of Hannah. After Samantha leaves, Curtis changes the sheets and cleans up the evidence. Later, he takes Hannah to the library, distracting her with a children's book while he searches for information about mental illness. On their way back, Curtis and Hannah stop at a grocery store to buy a lot of canned foods, causing them to be late for lunch with Hannah's family, who judge him for missing church. In the afternoon, Curtis begins cleaning the storm shelter and storing the canned food he bought for emergencies. He stays there, reading the library books. Later, Curtis sees a doctor and explains he's been having trouble sleeping for 4 days. Initially, the doctor doesn't think it's a big deal, so Curtis also mentions his nightmares, bedwetting, and feeling pain from the dog bite. The doctor prescribes him medicine for a few days and advises him to see a psychiatrist in Columbus. Meanwhile, Samantha visits the insurance agency to inquire about an operation to restore Hannah's hearing. Fortunately, her request is approved and all expenses are covered because Curtis's job offers a very good policy. At the same time, Curtis goes to the pharmacy to get his medicine and is surprised to find he doesn't have to pay much thanks to his insurance. That night, the family enjoys a wonderful dinner together, celebrating the good news. Curtis doesn't mention his medicine. While getting ready for bed, Samantha starts planning a vacation since they won't have to worry about money anymore. Curtis secretly takes his medicine in the bathroom. The next morning, Curtis wakes up feeling well rested and Samantha notices he looks healthier too. However, at work, Curtis still talks to Dort about the right amount of food for his shelter. Suddenly, he hears thunder in the clear sky. When Dort says he doesn't hear anything, Curtis panics and runs to a bin to throw up. Struggling with a panic attack, Curtis leaves work and has trouble breathing while driving, so he stops the car to regain control. When he's calm, he notices a place that sells containers and gets one to expand the shelter. Moments later, he visits his mother, who behaves awkwardly due to heavy medication. She developed paranoid schizophrenia around the same age Curtis is now. He's worried the same might be happening to him and tries asking her questions, but she doesn't remember much about those stressful years. Curtis calls his doctor to explain he can't drive all the way to Columbus for a psychiatrist and asks for an alternative. That night, he calculates the cost of transforming the shelter into a full bunker. The next morning, he goes to the bank and takes out a home improvement loan without telling Samantha, ignoring his agent's warnings. Later at work, Curtis asks Dort for help because he wants to take some equipment from work to build his bunker. Despite it being against the rules, Dort agrees to help. While worried, Dort asks if Curtis is okay, and Curtis assures him he is. After work, Curtis visits a local counselor, sharing all his theories based on his research. The counselor explains she can't diagnose or prescribe medication, but they can talk to help him through his crisis. Curtis opens up about his mother, who left the family, leaving his dad to raise him and his brother. She was later found eating trash from a dumpster and was placed in a state hospital. He also begins discussing his dreams. In the evening, the family attends another school meeting. On the way back, Curtis stops the car, seeing lighting in the sky. However, his family is still sleeping and no other drivers react, increasing his worry about his mental health. On Saturday, while Samantha and Hannah are at the fair, Curtis and Dort work on the shelter. When Samantha arrives and sees everything, she freaks out, leading to an argument. Samantha becomes angrier when she learns Curtis took out a loan and demands an explanation for his recent strange behavior, including locking up Red. Curtis insists there's nothing to explain and leaves to check on Hannah, while Samantha has a breakdown. That night, Curtis takes more medicine than prescribed. In the middle of the night, Samantha wakes up to find Curtis having a seizure and bleeding next to her. She calls an ambulance, ignoring Curtis's insistence that it's unnecessary. After the paramedics leave, Curtis finally tells Samantha everything. He promises to see the counselor regularly because he doesn't want to abandon his family like his mother did. The next day, Curtis and Samantha take Hannah to the hospital for a checkup, and her surgery is scheduled in 6 weeks. At work, Curtis asks his boss to remove Dort from his crew because he doesn't want to give orders to his best friend. Jim finds it odd but agrees, also pointing out Curtis's frequent absences. Curtis explains it's due to Hannah's doctor visits, but Jim gives him a warning. After work, Curtis goes to buy gas masks, finding them very expensive. Meanwhile, Dort's wife tells Samantha about rumors regarding Curtis's behavior, but Samantha gets defensive, insisting they are fine. Later, Curtis is working on the shelter when his brother Kyle visits, having heard about his strange behavior from Samantha. Kyle is worried about Curtis's health, but Curtis insists he's fine and tells Kyle to visit their mother. The brothers have an awkward relationship. Before Kyle leaves, Curtis asks him to take Red. During a stormy afternoon, Curtis enters the kitchen to find Samantha soaked from the rain. They stare at each other before she considers grabbing a knife. However, this is another dream. At breakfast, Curtis can't shake the unsettling feeling from the nightmare, and when Samantha tries to touch his hand, he pulls it away. At that moment, they notice Jim waiting outside. Curtis rushes to meet him and hears terrible news. Jim found out about the equipment Curtis borrowed illegally and fires him, leaving him with only 2 more weeks of medical insurance. Dort is also given 2 weeks of unpaid administrative leave for helping. When Curtis shares the news with Samantha, she slaps him and rushes out of the room with Hannah. Later, Curtis visits his counselor only to discover she has been transferred, replaced by a new guy. This man wants Curtis to start over from the beginning, but Curtis, unable to handle revisiting his past, leaves without a word. He returns to the shelter and continues working on it. Meanwhile, Samantha mends neighbors' clothes for extra money, but it isn't enough, so she takes the remaining savings from their vacation fund. In the evening, Samantha talks to Curtis, who explains his recent flinching was due to a dream and holds her hand to show he's working on it. Samantha announces they're canceling the beach trip and will use his last paycheck to cover 2 months of bills. She plans to postpone Hannah's surgery, and they both need to focus on finding jobs. Samantha is willing to work through their issues, but she insists Curtis must see a psychiatrist and attend a school dinner on the weekend to address his isolation. At the event, Dort confronts Curtis, blaming him for his job suspension. Curtis tries to suggest they talk later in private, but Duart persists, complaining about Curtis cutting him off despite their friendship. Duart even pushes and punches Curtis, who kicks him back. Finally snapping, Curtis yells and throws a table on the floor, announcing a devastating storm is coming and no one is prepared. He then breaks down and Samantha takes the opportunity to bring him home. Later, Curtis sees Hannah in the middle of the road and runs to pick her up. Suddenly, a flock of birds flies in weird patterns towards them. He protects Hannah as the birds fly past, and they fall dead to the ground. Terrified, he runs into the house as a siren begins wailing. At that moment, he wakes up and realizes the siren is real. It's raining heavily, so Curtis takes his family to a shelter. After locking the door, he makes them put on oxygen masks just in case. They fall asleep, waiting for the storm to pass. A few hours later, Curtis wakes up and checks the door, but still feels the storm outside, so he goes back to sleep. In the morning, Samantha wakes him, asking to open the door because the storm's over. Curtis disagrees, saying he can still hear it, and makes Samantha touch the door to feel it. However, Samantha doesn't hear or feel anything. Panicking, Curtis steps back and refuses to open the door, offering the key to Samantha. She refuses, insisting Curtis confront his fears himself. Wanting to be strong for his family, Curtis gathers his courage and opens the door to find a beautiful sunny day. The neighbors are fine and picking up any trash left by the storm. Sometime later, Samantha takes Curtis to the psychiatrist. The doctor agrees to give Curtis more medication immediately and decides he needs time away from the shelter. He advises the family to take a few days off to rest and prepare, as Curtis will need to be sent to a specialized facility until he recovers. This means he won't see his family for a while. The next day, the family is at the beach. Curtis and Hannah are making a sandcastle when suddenly Hannah signs the word storm as she points at the sea. Samantha comes out and discovers it's raining oil. At that moment, the whole family sees a huge dark storm approaching in the distance. Curtis turns to Samantha, who nods, confirming she can see it too.